Hello everyone, welcome to Naturalist Nights. This is a 10-week speaker series put on by the Wilderness Workshop, Roaring Fork Audubon, and the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. Please check out our literature outside, as well as check out Pickens County's open space management plan for North Star Nature Preserve. I know a lot of us love to use that space, so check it out, make comments. This speaker series is put on at 6 p.m. in Carbondale, 6 p.m. here at Hallam Lake each week. Our last one is next week, so be sure to come out to that. I want to acknowledge the land that we're on. Here we are next to the Roaring Fork River on the Continental Divide, where the Ute people stewarded this land for generations. We want to thank our sponsors for this Naturalist Night series. Our special sponsor of the night is Blazing Adventures. These sponsors help give financial and in-kind donations to cover travel expenses for our speakers, as well as providing costs for GrassRoots TV to be here, making Naturalist Nights possible. GrassRoots TV is aired on Channel 12 Up Valley and Channel 82 Down Valley. Videos are also available on our organization's websites and social media feeds, including a Facebook Live feed. Next week's speaker series for Naturalist Nights is Dr. Kelly Elder and Brian Lazara with the March 2019 Avalanche Cycle, one for the history books. So if you have questions about that, that's the one to go to. But tonight we have Dr. Rosemary Carroll here today. She's an associate professor at the Desert Research Institute, where she studies groundwater and surface water interactions. She received her undergraduate degree in physics from Bates College in Maine, and her master's and Ph.D. from University of Nevada, Reno in hydrology, in which she studied the transport and bioaccumulation of mercury in river reservoir systems. Tonight she will present her research on the East River near her home in Crested Butte at the field site of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, watershed function science flows area. We are super honored to have Dr. Rosemary Carroll here with us today.
A pointer. Okay. Well, good evening, and thank you for coming. So I originally did my my master's and PhD work, where I was actually in mercury transport in fluvial river systems, mostly sediment transport. But over time, because I work in Nevada, I really was doing much more groundwater hydrology, and the importance of upland areas, even to lowland, lower basin areas where we have a lot of agriculture. Linking those two processes together is really important in Nevada. And as a result, I've been expanding up basin all the time. Now, I love to ski. I love the mountains. And so this has been a wonderful sort of evolution for me, where I can work and live and study the natural systems of my home environment, which is in Crested Butte, Colorado. So today I'm going to talk about snowmelt to streamflow. My focus is going to be on groundwater, but we're also going to talk about streamflow in general. And are these systems sensitive to change? Are they sensitive to temperature and precipitation changes in our snowpack? Are they sensitive to forest changes? And we're going to kind of go through some of this quickly, but please, during the question period, feel free to ask any questions related to forests or snowpack if I didn't get it in this presentation. So you can't do science by yourself. At least I can't. I rely on people being really knowledgeable in a lot of things. And you also need funding. No one told me that when I went into science, that you actually need to be funded. And so I'm really going to talk about work that's funded by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory through a grant that they get through the Department of Energy. And I also have quite a bit of funding through the USGS, or U.S. Geological Survey, through a national grant program there. And a long, long list of key collaborators that I work with. One of them in the room tonight, Jeff Deems. He's right there. Raise your hand. Jeff is a key member of the team in terms of looking at snow processes and snow dynamics, mapping of snow. We're going to look at some of his work tonight in the slideshow. I'm in the long list of very generous people, both in the field and in the lab and with their own expertise. So why do we care about mountain systems? I'm kind of preaching to the choir, I guess, here. We all love the mountains. You live here in Aspen or in the Roaring Fork Valley. We know how beautiful they are. But they also, snowmelt-driven systems, these are responsible for about half the fresh water to human populations in the world. So they serve a huge outsourced, sort of outsized contribution of fresh water in our, on the earth itself. And in the semi-arid and arid basins like the Colorado River, they can be responsible for 80 to 100% of the stream flow that goes into the Colorado River. For instance, comes from Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. All those millions and millions of people are reliant on the snowpack in these mountains. They're also sort of the canary in the coal mine, right? They're indicators of change. We're seeing large changes happening in the mountain systems. We're seeing accelerated warming that is in excess of, say, the national or global average are happening in our mountain systems, okay? And then they also provide extensive ecosystem services. ACES is an example of this, right? We get a lot of environmental services out of this, but we also get a lot of, a large component of our economy is also coming out of these river systems. There was a study done in 2014 that said if the Colorado River saw a 20% reduction in its stream flow, it would see up to $287 billion worth of lost economic activity and 3.2 million jobs lost. So this is a huge both environmental and economic engine for the Western United States. All right, so this is Crested Butte, my home, and the Lawrence DOE. We love our acronyms in science. So DOE is Department of Energy. LBL is Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. East River Watershed Function Science Focus Area, or SFA. Oh my God, you're going to be quizzed on that later. We are located in this beautiful town, my town, Crested Butte, sister city to you guys over here. And the East River, I'm going to be talking about the upper East River here, but the whole East River flows out of all these tributaries down toward the Almont Gauge. Now, LBL's main challenge is, their grand science challenge is, how do these mountain systems store and release water, nutrients, heavy metals, carbon from episodic, very quick, short time scales, all the way up to decadal time scales. So I work with them. But before we get going, you probably know this, it's going to be a little bit of a refresher. I wanted to go a little bit over the water cycle, okay, just to get some terminology straight. We get our water, here's the water cycle, it's going in a circle, right? So we get our water from the oceans, and then we get some condensation and precipitation up in the mountains. A lot of it falls as snow. It melts, and it can flow off the mountains as runoff, or it can seep into the subsurface through infiltration and deeper into the groundwater. We call that recharge. Okay? We also have losses through evapotranspiration, plant water use, and also evaporation from the soil itself, evaporation from the snowpack, we call that sublimation, evaporation from the snow and rain that gets captured on the needles and leaves of your trees and plants. That also goes back into the atmosphere and goes back into the cycle. Okay, so we're going to be only looking at this part of the water cycle, but to get a larger sense of how big the water cycle is. So this is sort of a resultant figure, but I'm going to start here and we're going to come back here at the closer to the end of the talk. This is just a representative hill slope, steep alpine territory, no vegetation. We go down into the subalpine. This is where you see all those large conifer stands, okay? Then we move down into the montane. So you'll see aspen in this area, maybe coming up in the subalpine, but our aspen tend to be in these lower montane areas. We start to see shrubs and things like that. And then we have a riparian zone where we have groundwater-dependent ecosystems. This is your riparian vegetation, your big cottonwoods and things like that that use groundwater, okay? Because we call those phreatophytes. You have your stream down here. What I wanted to point out is we have snow. We're going to talk about snow and the processes that are associated here. But what I wanted to point out here is this soil zone. This soil zone moves water through it called interflow. So you're going to hear the term interflow a lot. This is an ephemeral source of water, right? So the water goes into the soil zone and it moves laterally. And we're going to get into what that interflow does in terms of the hydrologic processes in a watershed. And then we have deeper groundwater flow that's moving through maybe the alluvium or the bedrock in the watershed. So those are two different kinds of flow, interflow and groundwater, truly saturated groundwater flow that's not ephemeral. All right, so the questions, this is the East River. Looking down on the upper East River, this is what we call the lower floodplain. I'm standing on, I'm a big backcountry skier. I'm standing on Snodgrass Mountain, and I'm looking across the East River to Copper Creek. So I'm gonna talk a lot about Copper Creek today. You can see the mountains here. You are not on, I was just looking at your beautiful mountains at the top. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous out there. But similarly, we have these steep mountains, a lot of complicated geology. We have large gradients, not only in elevation, but here's aspen grove. We have these conifer, spruce, and mostly fir. And so we have a complicated landscape. So the question I want to ask here is, how important is groundwater to stream flow in these mountain systems? Is it all just the snowmelt from that year, or is there a delay in that groundwater? How important is it? What are the first order controls in generating that groundwater? And then lastly, how old is groundwater? And we'll get to why we care about age later. Getting at these questions, just to kind of get back at this, we have these covariant relationships between climate, topography, vegetation, and if we're going to talk about groundwater, we need to talk about geology too. Okay, so getting at how groundwater gets into our streams, we need to try to understand how these vary and how they relate to each other in both space and time. So my basin, the Copper Creek, I estimate is 80% of its precipitation input is by snow, 20% by rain. So snow is the driver of hydrology here. So we need to be able to understand snow in our basin both in time and in space. So to do temporal variability, I'm going to rely on the snow telemetry network, or the SNOTEL sites. You have several in this area. This is the Schofield SNOTEL. It's located in the upper portions of the crystal drainage, but it's very close to Crested Butte, and has a lot of snow there. It's a good predictor of some of the hydrologic response in the basin adjacent to it. And what I'm showing you here is snow water equivalent, SWE, over a water year, October to September. And I'm showing different traces of snow water equivalent over time for the period of record of 1987 to 2018. And what you can see is we have a lot of variability. So 1995, really large snow year. So some of you may remember this. I was living in Crested Butte before I went to graduate school at this time. It was a big year. It was also a late melting year. The snowpack stayed around a long time. 2012, during this period of record, is the other end member. It's dry, it's warm. We have very low peak SWE in this area, or snow water equivalent. It melts out really early. And then we have the whole gamut in between. 1998 serves as what we call our median year. It falls in the middle. All right, so I'm going to keep harping back to 1998 as my representative year. Now, to map snow in space, we use ASO, or Airborne Snow Observatory. And Jeff has been, I think, speaking to a crowd recently here up in Snowmass. I think he's spoken maybe about it a little bit here, but we're going to show some of this work. So what this is LIDAR. They fly, in this case, airborne LIDAR. They fly when there's no snow, and then they fly again when there is snow, and they get the depth of that snow at 3-meter resolution across the entire landscape. It's amazing. So then we can scale that up to snow water equivalent, because snow depth times the density of that snow gives you the water content in that snow. So that's how we get to SWE, or snow water equivalent. And we've been flying flights since 2016, and I'm just going to talk about 2016, which is an average water year, 2018, which is a low water year, but we've been continuing these flights in 2019 and 2020. Many of these flights have been funded through the Colorado Water Conservation Board or through NASA directly through some of their research programs, and the first flight was funded by Lawrence. On the right-hand side of your screen here, and this is the East River Huck 10, or hydrologic unit code Huck 10. This is about 750 square kilometers here. This is one of our bigger agricultural domains, Ohio Creek. So this is a partial of that flight. The red here signifies high snow depth, so it's deep, while the blue and the black are low snow depth. So we see these elevation gradients, lots of snow in the mountains, not a lot of snow down in the valleys. This is done in March 2018, a very dry year. We also, indicating all these little pink dots here, this is where we've gone out and dug pits, and we use those snow pits to get depth, snow water equivalent, density, and we also do isotopic water isotopes and also a whole suite of chemistry in these pits. This is Jeff digging, he's tall, so that's a big pit. This is Lauren, she's little, but she's out of the pit, so you can't tell. All right. If we zoom in, if we go back and look at this square box, I'm going to zoom in closer to my domain that I'm going to talk about today, into the upper portions of the East River and into Copper Creek. And if we zoom in, and I've shown you here Copper Creek, and you can see, yes, there are these elevational differences. Lots of snow up high, lower snow down in the valleys. Red is high snow depth, blue is low. But it's more complicated than that, right? And so next week, if you come and listen to Brian, and I'm not sure if Kelly is coming or not, because I heard something that he might not be, but they are fantastic. And they're going to talk a lot about last year's big avalanche. But you can see if you squint, because I don't have, but there's avalanches. This is Gothic Mountain. You can see the avalanches coming off of here, right? So you're moving snow off the slope and driving these big depths down low. That's avalanche activity. We also see wind redistribution off of the ridges, so you don't tend to see a lot of snow right on the ridge. It gets blown off and dumped on, on the other side. So in our case, because of the prevailing winds, we tend to see the snow get dumped on the northeast side of these ridges. Okay, so it's not a simple picture in terms of snow distribution. Just to show this, I love this slide. This is also from Jeff. Here's the East River. We'll talk about Pump House a little bit. We can redistribute snow by humans. So this is man-made snowmaking. And you can look at Crested Butte Mountain Resort and you can see where they're making snow. These are like the terrain parks, where the kids go and jump big jumps. That's where they're making snow. And you can see that resolution with ASO. It's a hugely powerful tool. All right, so now I'm going to get to my actual research. This is the Upper East River. Here's that pump house, which I just was showing. That's the pump house. It's right near the ski resort right here. So this is the pump house. This is the bottom of this particular watershed. This watershed is about 85 square kilometers. One of the first things I was tasked to do on this project was to go out and set up a stream discharge network for all the principal tributaries in this basin. So here's Copper Creek to give you a sense of scale. It's about 24 square kilometers. So each of these tributaries is collecting stream discharge, and we're also collecting a bunch of chemistry. And then we have a whole host of other things we have going on in terms of chemistry and in terms of wells and things like that that are a little bit beyond this talk or not needed for this talk. So what I did here is I took all the Streamflow data, and we were collecting all this fantastic chemistry data. And I'm the first one on this project to get to see all this data. So me and a postdoc, Lindsay Bierup, decided we were going to do a thing called end-member mixing analysis, or EMA. So what we did was we took we looked at all the chemistry, and we ended up choosing calcium, magnesium, strontium, uranium, sulfate. This is an isotope of water called deuterium, and then another isotope of water called oxygen-18. I am not a chemist, so I'm not going to pretend that I am. But with Lindsay's help, we took these 6 parameters and we consolidated them through mathematics, principal component analysis, into 2-dimensional space. So here's one axis and here's the other axis. And all you need to know is that using this chemistry, rain falls over here, its chemistry is up here, snow falls here, and groundwater falls here. They fall in distinct zones. The chemistry of the stream at pump house at the daily level moves through this space over time as a function of its hydrograph. So a hydrograph is flow over time. So like most snow-dominated rivers, we have low flow during the winter, and then in the spring we see the hydrograph, the stream flow go up with snowmelt, drop down and go to base flow. The chemistry follows these different end members as we move through this hydrograph. It moves toward the snow component during the peak discharge, it moves toward the rain component during monsoon events, and it moves back toward groundwater during base flow. Okay? I can separate out how much groundwater is in this stream using that chemistry. Okay? It's just a math thing. And so I'm going to talk about groundwater. All right? So you're going to see this term called FGW. It just means the fraction of stream flow that is groundwater. Okay? So the fraction, what I did was I determined the fraction of groundwater in each of these major tributaries. It's hard to see them delineated here, but here's Copper Creek, you know, here's Rustler's Gulch if you've been to Crested Butte, and here's Rock Creek, and there's Quigley, and et cetera, et cetera. And I took the fraction of groundwater as computed from chemistry, and I just started throwing it at the wall and seeing what would stick. So the fraction of groundwater, for instance, if I plotted as a function of snow water equivalent, the volume of snow water equivalent, this is from ASO, I see that as we get bigger basins, we get more volume of snow, but we also get more groundwater. It's not a great regression. It's not exact, but we do see bigger basins have more groundwater in their stream as a fraction of that. But what we see are these vegetation controls. Fraction of groundwater compared to the percent conifer by area. A really strong relationship here. What this means is those basins in the upper East River that have less conifer have more groundwater. Okay? So that, okay, what does that mean? And then we also see that the fraction of groundwater as a function of tree cover density. How densely packed are those trees with each other? Those basins that have really densely packed in forests have very low groundwater. Okay, so Copper Creek, right here, keep coming back to it, has the highest amount of groundwater of all the tributaries of a whole system. It has 33% groundwater. That's annually. So why that peak discharge is really significant and pushes a lot of water through the system, groundwater is not insignificant. It's a third of all the annual stream flow, according to chemistry. Okay, so it's important. So where does that mean groundwater is happening? This is the lower floodplain. It's a beautiful meandering. I put this slide here for Jim because he says he loves this view. So do I. Right? This is White Rock Mountain. So where recharge is happening, according to chemistry, it's happening in the upper subalpine. This is that transition between no vegetation and dense vegetation. This is where the conifer forest is grading into the alpine environment. This is also where ASO says all the snow resides. Not all, but a large fraction of snow. Lots of snow right here. Okay, so this suggests that the upper subalpine is generating groundwater. Again, this is all empirical. In other words, it's inference, all right? It's not mechanistic. I'm not using physics there. I'm just balancing the chemistry, okay? So now I'm going to move to a more mechanistic approach. I'm going to use models. By models, I mean numeric models, all right? So these are, when you look at the weather forecast, you're looking at a weather model, okay? We're going to talk about a hydrologic model. So the hydrologic model has two parts. It has a surface part and it has a groundwater part. The surface part includes what I put in by temperature, precipitation, calculate solar radiation, et cetera, and that's where I do all my, the deep groundwater. So, but I'm capturing all the energy and water budget components of the surface processes. So, airborne snow observability. This is the LIDAR-derived snow depth. This is snow water equivalent, sorry. During around peak SWE on March 30th, a low snow year, and then May 23rd, much later in the year on a dry year. You can see what ASO is showing us. Even on an exceptionally dry year like 2018, we still have big pockets of snow residing up in the mountains. Nothing's down below, right? but we still have snow here. The model, I was pretty excited about this. The model is showing that we are able to hold on to these pockets of snow as well. So that's kind of cool. I was really happy with this. And while we might be over-predicting melt or I should say over-predicting melt, but under-predicting snow somehow down here low, we are doing a really good job up high for this size of a model. So I kind of toot my horn on that one. All right, now we have a groundwater model. The groundwater model is going to stick to the surface component model, right? They're attached and they communicate directly with each other. But the groundwater model takes up a lot of computational time. So I'm only going to do it for Copper Creek because this is where the chemistry said I have the most groundwater. So I'm going to go there. The groundwater model is multiple, it's 12 layers thick, 12 layers deep, goes 400 meters deep. The yellow part here is alluvium. So, and then the pink here is igneous rock. This is the granite. And then the blues and the other colors, these are sedimentary rocks we'll talk about later. So with the groundwater model attached to that surface model, I can model groundwater flux going to streams. I can model that really fast seasonal interflow that's coming through the soil zone. I can also do stream losses back into the groundwater system. I can do changes in groundwater storage, so water tables going up and water tables going down. I can do changes in stream stage, and I can do this thing called groundwater ET. This is that phreatophytic water use. That's what you would see here, right? These guys are attached. They're accessing some of the groundwater because they're low in the landscape. This is the hydrograph, stream flow over time, but for the entire 30-plus year record. And so I only have actual observed data in the black dots. These are measured by me. This is measured by a Rocky Mountain Biological Lab researcher that lent me the data. And the gray dots here are just a regression with a USGS gauge, so they're not exact, but it does show me the ups and downs of each year. And we see that this Copper Creek model, fully integrated with the groundwater system, is capturing that interannual variability, and it's doing so in a fairly good way. It's got this metric at 0.8. 0.1 would be, 1.0 would be perfect. So we're getting pretty close on such a complicated model. All right. This is busy, and I'm going to go through it a little bit. So we talk about the term aridity, so don't worry about this. But aridity, well, aridity is potential ET divided by precipitation. So think of potential ET as the atmospheric demand. It's what the atmosphere wants. Okay, so the higher the atmospheric demand, the more plants need to get water to grow. Okay, so it's really hot outside, it's really dry, you need to water your garden a lot to keep it happy, right? So as we move from low aridity to high aridity, these are wet and cool conditions, and these are warm and dry conditions. So as you move across this axis. ET to P, this is the function, this is the amount of evapotranspiration, the amount that your plants are using, if you will, and the soil and the other sources. How much of your water budget is going to the losses back to the atmosphere, not going to your stream flow? Okay, so that's what this is. So under very wet conditions in Copper Creek, we're looking at losses of ET, losses to the atmosphere of a little more than 20%, but this grows up to about 50% under dry years. So the snowpack comes in, the rain, this is everything. 50% goes back to the atmosphere. It doesn't go to the stream. Okay. The remaining 50 or a little bit less percent then either gets to the stream really fast through the soil, interflow, or slower potentially and more gradually through that deeper groundwater flow. So interflow is that fast component. And when it's really wet and cool, we have a lot of interflow. We have a lot of stream flow right in June, right? It gets really high. But when it's hot and dry, we have very low interflow. Our peak discharge drops, and it drops in response really also to ET. It's nonlinear. So this goes up, this goes down. Those are related. What is less responsive is groundwater. Groundwater hangs in there, buffers your system late in the year, and maintains that base flow. It's really important. The average in the model of groundwater in the system, the fraction of groundwater, in other words, how much groundwater is there compared to interflow plus groundwater, is 35%. Chemistry said it was 33. So I was like, yes, my model is working, I think, right? So that is really exciting. But is it 35% all the time? No. On wet years, it's only maybe 20%, because most of your discharge that year is coming from interflow. On very dry years, you're highly relying on that groundwater. It's making up maybe 50% or more of your stream discharge. Okay, so it's a big moderator, buffer, if you will, especially for late season stream flow. All right, where is recharge? Recharge is what creates groundwater. And I'm just going to go through this a little quickly because it's a little busy, but recharge in the basin, this is Copper Creek, this is a median water year, this is kind of like what happens sort of on average, if you will. The blue recharge, this is simulated with that model. The blue is really high recharge and red is really low recharge. So recharge is happening up in these upper elevations. It is not happening down low, and it's definitely very low along those southern exposures. So aspect is really important here. A lot of people like to, there's a lot of work out there linking recharge to snowmelt, right? So the amount of snow sitting here, that then drives the amount of recharge that goes down below the rooting zone of the plants and gets into the groundwater system. And you can see that, yeah, there's more melt up high, and there's more recharge up high, and there's less melt down low, and there's less recharge down low. So maybe they are related. But when you plot up a regression saying, okay, well, let's just predict recharge with snowmelt. We see here's regression recharge, and this is the model recharge. We see that it doesn't do a great job. If it did a great job, it would follow this one-to-one line. But it's not. It's dropping off. And it only has a predictive ability of about 33%. It's not great. You could say, well, it's doing a better job at the lower end. See, that's sort of following the one. There's a lot of scatter, but but where it's really failing is up here on the high recharge. Melt is not describing that. Instead, we have to look at interflow. So here's interflow again. Interflow is that movement of snowmelt through the soil zone. Where it's highest is up in these upper elevations. If I include interflow with snowmelt, I end up doing a much better job predicting recharge. So that soil zone component, the lateral movement of water through the soil zone, becomes important in predicting where groundwater recharge is happening. If we look at a really dry year like 2012, look what happens to recharge down in the basin. It goes to super low. But so we're not getting a lot of groundwater generation in 2012 because there's not a lot of snow. But we do still have recharge, at least the model predicts it, happening up high. So it has a certain amount of resilience to climate. It's not being completely driven just by really bad snowpack. If we look at snowmelt, not a whole lot of snowmelt going on in the model, and the regression here, snowmelt driven predictability drops to it drops to 0.24, so it's really poor, and interflow now drives the whole recharge process. So it's kind of this interesting link. Interflow is very much connected to snow, but it also is connected to recharge. Okay. So back to this figure we had in the beginning. All right, here's our alpine environment. Here's the subalpine where we have the thick conifer forests. Here's the montane and the riparian. The zone between the alpine and the alpine and the subalpine, this transition zone, this is the upper subalpine that the chemistry said we should have a lot of recharge generation. The model says the same thing. We have redistribution by wind and avalanche of snow off these peaks and into these areas, into the upper subalpine. So we have more snowpack here. This drives melt and forces recharge. We have some melt here. We also have some melt driving low recharge lower in the landscape. Interflow then moves snowmelt through this sort of shallow soil fractured regolith zone, and it hits this transition in topography and forces that down and creates what I'll call preferential recharge zones that are somewhat decoupled from interannual snow variability. Lower in the landscape, though, that inner flow does occur, but it doesn't drive recharge. It drives ET. So those plants, the trees, the forests lower in the landscape, they rely, especially on a dry year, they're relying on this soil contribution, this redistribution of water through the landscape to keep them, try to keep them healthy. Right? And then groundwater dependent ecosystems, this is your riparian corridor. They use groundwater to support their water needs, particularly later in the year. They also rely on soil storage and soil moisture and stuff from monsoons and whatnot. We'll get to that next. All right, so 2018, it was a very dry year, right? It was a really, really bad ski year. And here's Snowmelt again. This is Schofield. So, and 2012 is shown as the worst year on record. So very low snowpack, melted really early. 2018 was also really bad, but it wasn't as bad as 2012. It had a slightly higher snowpack, had a slightly later snow melt date. However, if you look at the USGS gauge downstream at Almont, at the bottom of the whole East River Huck 10 unit, we see, okay, inner flow, the 2012 had a lower peak, that agrees maybe here. They both start to dive off, but then what happens in the late part of the year? 2018 has lower late season flow than 2012, despite having more snow and melting later. Blue Mesa is an important component of the Aspinall unit. It's an important component of downstream delivery to meet our compact obligations as part of the Colorado Storage Project. What we saw in Blue Mesa was brutal. I'm on the water district there. This was terrifying to our constituents in the Upper Gunnison. Record low water levels, toxic algal blooms. It was a bump. It was bad. A lot of panic going on in the Gunnison Valley at this time. So what's going on? So I go to your paper, okay? So this came out right after, this is October 2nd. So just to highlight here what the Colorado District Department of Water Resources engineer said, we had a bad snowpack. It was not the worst. We had an incredibly dry summer, a total lack of rain. Then he says, we are going to find the flows in the later summer are unprecedented. That's what we saw in the Gunnison, the East River gauge. It happened here too. It happened in the Crystal, it happened in the Roaring Fork as well. So why? Are monsoons important to stream flow? Most of the time I'd say no. Monsoons go to support ET. They don't go to support stream flow, okay? That's what I would say off the cuff. So we're gonna run a little thought experiment with a model. We have a model, let's run it, okay? So what happens if I have no monsoon? Let's compare model results for 2012 in red and model results for 2018 in white. So I hope you can see those. But soil moisture, okay, over March to October. So what happens is early in the year you have snowmelt, it goes into the soil zone, it saturates the soil zone, it's 100% saturated, and then as we move into what we call the pre-monsoon period, where it's dry here in June, we start to see a decline in the soil moisture according to the model. Then in 2012, we start to get monsoons. 2018, we don't. So we don't see those spikes in soil moisture, right? What do the plants do? Plants consume water through ET, evapotranspiration. So we do this metric, ET to potential. So if this value is 1, that means the plants are getting all the water they want. They're happy, okay, for that time of year. So early in the spring, maybe the plants aren't super aggressively need water, maybe they're just starting to grow, but we have a value of 1, which means they have enough water. But as we move into the dry early part of the summer, we see ET become less than 1. That means the plants are getting stressed. With the monsoons though, we put water in the soil, like in 2012, and we get these spikes in the model of ET. So the plants are sucking up that water from the monsoon. In 2018, we don't have that. What we do see in 2018 is if we look at the fraction of ET that's coming from the groundwater in Copper Creek. Here's 2012, so late summer we see more groundwater ET. but 2018 in white is higher. What happens in the stream flow, at least according to the model? Inner flow, this is that ephemeral seasonal flow. Here's red is 2018. Those monsoons allow some inner flow to be generated. Where 2018 we had no monsoons really, no inner flow. What happens to the fraction of groundwater? We have low fraction of groundwater during high inner flow because it's mostly snowmelt from that year. And as we move toward base flow, we move toward a value of 1, all groundwater. It happens earlier for 2018 than it does for 2012. And what happens to stream flow? We have higher peaks in 2018, but lower late season flow. So the model is showing what we saw at Almont, but in the headwater basin. And what this suggests is by not having monsoons, we do affect stream flow. So that's sort of counterintuitive to what I would have thought. Okay. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about is the age of base flow and why do we care about how old something is. I certainly don't want anyone asking my age, right? So maybe we shouldn't be talking about, but age is a function of memory. How much memory does your system have? Is it super sensitive to the annual variability of snowpack? Does it have some buffer in there? So we need to ask those questions about groundwater. We don't want systems where we don't have late season flow. We don't want our streams drying up in August. So to do this, I'm going to use the integrated model I was just talking about. I'm not going to talk about the details, but I'm going to tell you that I went out and did an experiment in the stream using gas tracers. And then I'm going to take that information to give me information about the geology in that basin because I don't have any deep wells up in Copper. First of all, it's in the Maroon Bell Wilderness, so I can't put a well there. But also, how am I going to get a well up on like a 13,500, 14,000 foot peak? I can't. So maybe I could. Hey, Jim will get out there and drill one for me. But instead, I'm going to use what we call indirect means. So age tells me a little bit about the permeability of the bedrock. How easy is water flow through it? Tells me a little bit about the depth of flow. Is that flow really deep? Is it really shallow? So age is an indirect method to get at that geology. And then particles are something I do where I don't literally dump particles on the ground, but I dump them in the model. And I just spread particles everywhere, and I let them flow through the model to see what happens to them through the geology and the hydrology of that model. So here is Copper Creek in late August, doing my experiment, collected various gases in the river every hour for 12 hours, SF6, CFCs, nitrogen gas, and argon. So this was a big effort, and it required help. And I'm not going to go through the math or anything, but you just have to believe me that after a lot of work and help from Andy Manning with the USGS, because I am not a gas expert, just like I'm not a geochemistry expert, we feel really confident that this gas tracer experiment worked and that the minimum age is 10 years. It's not 1 year old. It's not 2 years old. It's not 3. It's 10 years old. This is much older than we thought it was going to be. It's not hundreds of years old. We're not in a big, giant alluvial basin. This is a tiny little creek up in near Crested Butte with granite, right? So it's like, how could this be? Let's run an experiment through the model. This is what models are built for. This is where I did the gas tracer experiment. Is that a stream crossing? This blue area, this is recharge, right? So the recharge is happening in the upper portions of the basin. So all the recharge is essentially happening, not all of it, but the majority of it is happening above that point. Okay, so that's where down below, much lower recharge. All right, these are the particles I dropped into the model. I drop them on and I let them flow through the model and I tag them with this recharge value. So if it dropped it there, it gets that recharge value. I dropped it there, it gets that recharge value. And from that, I can put it all together and come up and tell you how old the stream is right there in the model. It is 1.2 years old. That is not 10 years old. It's not even close. So I'm like, oh no, my model, which I thought was doing so well, is not doing that great. It's not matching that data. So if you look here, really blue, really young, this is really young water. Down here where recharge is low, these warm colors are really old water. All right, so we're talking this path here is maybe that one path of water the model suggests is 150 years old, so really old. But they're all mixed up, and overall, when you add it all together, it's only 1.2 years because the recharge is all up here, and this is where all the flows are really young. Okay, so it's dominated by that. Why is this? Why is it young? And why is it too young? Okay, let's look at the geology. This is Copper Creek geology. This is the upper part of the basin. It's granite. And I know, granite is like, hard rock. You don't think of that as a place where things have an easy time growing, right? It's not porous. It doesn't hold water. It just runs off of it like a parking lot, really, okay? Down below, we have these steeply dipping sedimentary beds. So you would recognize this bed. This is the Maroon Formation, right? This is what makes up your beautiful maroon bells, okay? And below it is the Gothic. They look a little bit similar. And then we have some other units here. So these beds are not horizontal. They've been pushed up by the igneous material coming up after and pushing everything up. And these are steeply dipping. So if you're in Crested Butte and you look at Avery Peak, it's this beautiful, like, sweeping rock. That's what this is. That's what this is. These are these upturned Maroon Formation beds. They're really permeable. They allow water to move through them, much more so than the granite. So that's why the water tables, the recharge is low, the permeability of this rock is high, the water tables are predicted to be really low, so flow paths here are really long and old. But up here, the granite is really tight. It's like a parking lot. The water just goes through the alluvium. It gets to the river really quickly. The recharge is high too, so water tables are really shallow. And I have a value of 1.2 years, which is wrong, according to the gas tracers. So let's look at this in terms of a schematic. Topographically controlled groundwater flow, high recharge, granite, high water tables. You get a lot of lovely perennial streams. This is all very young, maybe less than a year. You get some older flow paths, maybe coming from the divide of your basin, coming down here. But overall, this system is driving really young stream flow. If we look at the lower portion of the basin, or potentially a system where we see a lot of drying and low snowpack year after year after year, change our incoming water, we see if recharge declines, our lower snowpack, we start to see no recharge happening down low. We have maybe some still high recharge up in the upper subalpine. Our perennial streams turn ephemeral and they become a source of groundwater. They're not a source of stream water. And we get only long flows and the system becomes really old. So to make 1.2 years turn to 10 years without changing the recharge, without changing snow, because I'm going to trust that my model's doing an okay job there, I have to change the permeability of granite. I have to make it more able to move water through it. When I do that, so this is the model before at 1.2 years, and this is the model by increasing the permeability of that granite. And when I do this, I can get my stream flows to 10 years, but only that way. And so it says, oh, flow through granite maybe can happen. So I'm going to throw this at you without any of the results that got here. Here's Copper Creek. And what we find in our modeling results is that this is the median water year, 1998 conditions. And so think of groundwater as representing sort of a long-term average. If we are, and this is the model before I changed it, all these young flow paths in the upper basin, really young. This is really what it is on a median water year. But if I say turn all the snow to rain, and I dry it, I make there be less snow and I make it all rain, I move the system to this, okay? I move the system where those flow paths are no longer constrained by topography. All the perennial streams are gone. right? We are now moving toward a much older groundwater system. So it happens that Copper Creek, this really wet, really cold, really granitic basin, at median water year conditions, is right on that cusp of change. And that was really surprising. Now, this is one study, and it is one study only. And so my effort now through Lawrence Berkeley is to expand this study across the entire East River and see if we see similar relationships and see what are the nuances here, and do more and more of these experiments to try to understand, is the gas tracer experiment wrong, or is this really how it's happening? So there's an iterative process here. So this is just really hypothesis testing. All right, take home. How important is groundwater? Given the time frame, I'm going to tell you it's really important, okay? And it mostly comes in the upper subalpine. Those are your takeaway, okay? What are the first order controls on groundwater? Well, low in your basin, the first order control down at low elevations is snowmelt primarily, okay? But up high, it's driven by this topographically driven inner flow coming off the alpine, going into the upper subalpine, and then charging the system. Okay, so those are there's two kind of end members to that. And then lastly, how old is it? It's 10 years, at least in this basin. It means that we have flow moving deeper in the granite than we ever thought, and that this basin is not susceptible, is not, I should say, resilient necessarily to a lot of change. It's actually kind of hanging in there, and that was really surprising. And so that's it, I guess. I'll take any questions.
All right, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone has anything? All right, Adam.
Thank you. That was really awesome. Do you have any ideas about what the vegetation controls are on the percentage of groundwater? Is it inputs, outputs? Where's that being affected? So I'm talking about the two graphs you had where the percentage of groundwater in the streams was inversely correlated with tree density and percent. Yeah.
Yeah. So and stop me if I'm not answering your question, because I tend to go off on some tangent and I never actually get to the question. So if we look just even at this picture here, so the vegetation is constrained to portions in the landscape, right? It's not up in the upper subalpine. I mean, it's not in the alpine, right? You don't see it way up high above a certain elevation. And then also the like the aspen trees are really in this basin are down low and south facing. Right? So water use strategy, once you hit these dense forests, there's a lot of ET happening. Even though it's kind of cool, they're sucking up quite a bit of moisture. I'm not sure if that's helpful. And so in that transition zone where it's kind of not that dense, you have lower ET, right? But you also have higher snow. And what is the other thing? By having sort of a sparse density forest, you get 2 things. You have a lack of interception. You know, the trees aren't grabbing the snow and it's not falling and staying there and evaporating right off, but you have shading. Mm-hmm. So if you're walking through a forest and you come to an opening, you feel that solar radiation. Look where the snow is melting first. And the areas that have some shading from that solar radiation melt later. And so that upper subalpine area has both of those. Doesn't intercept as much, but it has enough to shade it. The snowpack lasts long. It melts really fast, and it drives that groundwater movement down. So that's a theory.
Cool.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So kind of related to that, you were talking about how the recharge is all at that upper subalpine, but then you mentioned the groundwater table dips down in that zone. Is that all just because of the ET use?
Oh, it might be just my figure. So maybe should I back up the figure? Would that be helpful? I'm trying to think of which one.
It was pretty early on where you were just mentioning how the groundwater table kind of went low in that conifer forest. but all the recharge is happening right above it. I was just a little confused in that.
Yeah,
part.
it might be my figure drawing.
Okay.
So just sorry about that. So we don't actually know where that water table is because I don't have a well. Now you can go up there and I can do perennial springs. That helps. You know, so I did go up and date springs in this area. But I don't know, from that top of the mountain right there, I don't know if the groundwater is, 10 feet below that or 200 meters or whatever. I don't know how deep that is. And that relationship is driven by recharge. So the more recharge you have, you typically have higher water tables in general. But it's also a function of the bedrock, right? So those two things work together to drive where your water table elevation is. So if you have a lot of recharge and a really permeable bedrock, like that sedimentary, like the Maroon Formation, your water table will be lower, deeper than if it was, say, a granite. Does that make sense? Did I get at your question?
You
could ask it again.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll get it again.
Be that figure thing you're talking about. But I'm talking more, not quite the alpine, but kind of this.
The subalpine.
Yeah, because the recharge is at the upper subalpine.
Let me see if I can back up. What did I do with my?
I could have just read it wrong. That's probably what happened.
Let me see if I lost my remote thingy. I don't know. Let me go back a little bit. See, maybe one of these figures, or like this figure, or even further back.
Even further back.
Okay, then I know where you were at. Okay. Sorry. Oh, that one? Oh. Doesn't want to be there. This one? Or no?
Yes. No,
okay. So let me try to see. So right here?
Yeah, so that upper subalpine where all the recharge is happening. But
yeah.
then I guess my question is, why does it go deeper instead of staying pretty high in the water table?
And that's just a schematic, but that's a good question. And the reason is the water table elevation tends to follow. This is an unconfined aquifer. That's at least how I'm modeling it. It's actually a fractured aquifer, and that's a whole nother difficulty that I'm not going to even address or even go close to with a 10-foot pole. But since it's an unconfined aquifer, the water table mimics land surface. So it's a muted version of, so your water table mimics that land surface, but it's going to be muted a little bit. So as this is really deep, maybe this goes downhill toward the discharge zone. So this has to drop in elevation to allow groundwater to go here. If it went up, right, which could be, you would have water doing this. It would be going, because think of it just like like a hill. Like if you dropped a ball, it's going to go in either direction, right? So in this case, we assume it's going toward the discharge zone, the stream.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll do last question to Jim.
Thank you, Rosemary. That was great. Does rock glaciers melting contribute anything significant to late season base flow?
So literally at the top of this basin, and I've gone up and I've been I did something. Where? Oh. I was trying to get you a map, Jim. I don't know why it's not letting me. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button. That's why. Couldn't be me. I'm just going to pull up. I don't know. This is not great. This is not a great image. All right. So this is Copper Creek right here, and this is all wilderness. And if you follow it and go that way, that's going toward Triangle Pass. So many of you maybe have hiked Triangle Pass, Conundrum area. East Maroon Pass is the other leg going that way. So East Maroon Pass there, Triangle Pass is that way. So, and I've gone up there and looked, and there is water coming out of the rock glacier all the time. Now in Rustler's Gulch, same thing, Rustler's Gulch is the next one over. It's hard to see here, but it does this big loop around, and it's adjacent to Copper Creek. And I've actually sampled that for isotopes and whatnot. And I have, if I get some more money, This is always the name of the game, is I was going to do maybe try to do some age dating up there to see how old it is. One of the big questions, a rock glacier guy at Mountain Climb asked me, you know, what I thought about those. And I think my question is, are we depleting that rock glacier? Like, this is a source of base flow, and it's cold, that water. Is that ice that's melting, is that this year's ice that kind of went down in, or is that like from like the last glacial period? I don't know the answer to that. And are we depleting it like the Himalayan glaciers? We're just burning through it and then it will just end at some point? I don't know the answers to that. But you're right, it is a source of stream flow.
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. See you next week. Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you.